with Arizona Springtime, Chapter 7, Exploring the Monolith. In the low-lying valley containing the Phoenix metro area, there are a few low hills in the bowl for a hiker to enjoy. On the bowl's rim are higher mountains to challenge a hiker. On the farthest east side, there sits one spectacular monolith. Driving along on the local roads, I could look east to the horizon and know there was a greater world beside the crushing effects of the city. The monolith is not the official scientific version of a monolith, for which the Rock of Gibraltar is one of the most famous. Nevertheless, it is a monolith in landscape terms. Maybe a better term is visual anchor. On a personal level, any time I was driving east or south of Phoenix, I searched for the visual anchor to bring the thought that wilderness was close by. Another candidate, such as Camelback Mountain, was too hemmed in by the city, and the McDowell Mountains were relatively inaccessible at the time because they are almost completely surrounded by private land or difficult public access. Driving up Interstate 10 from the east, it can be seen on the eastern horizon between Casa Grande and South Mountain. The monolith I am describing is Superstition Mountain, which rises 4,000 feet over the desert floor. The western front-facing wall is about 5 miles wide. Up close, its face is deeply pockmarked and heavily creased. I could see that erosion had taken its toll on the crags, crevices, and canyons. Maybe it can be climbed physically, but it remains unconquered in spirit. Geologically, Superstition Mountain began to rise over the area about 25 million years ago. The entire chains of Superstition Wilderness Mountains formed over a period of 20 million years during 5 eras of development, each marked by the eruption of massive calderas. These calderas generated some 2,500 cubic miles of volcanic flow. Geologists believe there's likely to be other deeper, more ancient calderas waiting to be discovered. Today, the result of those cataclysmic events of long ago can be appreciated up close. On Sunday mornings, it was an easy drive from our apartment near downtown Scottsdale to the natural world. The superstitions cover a large area and are easily accessible from any area of the valley, but especially so from the eastern suburbs. Our route took us to Apache Boulevard, and we bypassed the freeway system to encounter little traffic. With some luck, the 25-mile drive could be halved if green traffic lights lit the way. Near the foot of Superstition Mountain, I had to make a choice to drive right or left, depending on my choice of trailhead. Turning left, the Apache Trail wound through the wilderness and a string of trailheads. Turning right, a state highway skirted south from the monolith and led to the former mining towns of Superior and Globe. For this trip, I drove along the highway to the right. Before arriving at Superior, it was a turnoff for a well-maintained dirt road that extended for about 9 miles to dead end at Peralta Trailhead, an entrance into the Superstitions. Along the road, a turnoff veered to the east to a place called Don's Camp. It was named for a group of people who are members of the Don's Club of Arizona. The women of the Dons wore ornate colonial Spanish-style dresses, and men dressed as wealthy haciendados. The camp was a gathering spot for member horseback rides into the desert wilderness. 2 miles beyond the camp was the trailhead. The Peralta Trailhead was named for Don Miguel Peralta, who, in southwestern lore, was given a Spanish land grant. It never existed. Don Miguel played an important role in the Lost Dutchman mine folklore. The folk story began when the Don became the original locator of a fabulous gold mine. As the end of the Mexican-American War approached, his family decided to make one last trip into the Superstition Mountains to mine as much gold as possible. The family believed they would lose all their land after Mexico ceded it to the United States. During their escape south, most of the family was massacred by Apache. Years later, the last survivor's life was saved by Jacob Waltz, a Dutchman, during some historically obscure incident. Waltz was the Dutchman for whom the lost Dutchman mine was named. Waltz was told by the survivor the location of the mine as thanks for helping him survive the terrible incident. However, the survivor did not live long. For years after, Waltz would arrive in frontier Phoenix loaded with gold. After Waltz died, it was found that he had left many clues to the mine's location, both in the mountains and on maps. The appeal of the folk story continues to be so great that people continue to hunt for the treasure. Geologically speaking, inside the boundary of the Superstition Wilderness, there is no gold, silver, or copper. Nearby, outside the wilderness, there were many valuable historic metal mines. For me, as a young person coming from Illinois, I was lured into hiking in the mountains not because of the mine, but the given name of the mysterious Superstition Mountains. The rugged wilderness remains as one of the most difficult areas to assess in the state. Even during springtime, it was rare to find another parked vehicle at the trailhead. Even if another car was parked on the dirt lot, we never saw hikers. The week of spring break during my college years was always a great time to go into the wilderness. After graduating, I would still take time for a spring break hike if my job allowed for it. Audrey and I enjoyed the 9-mile loop trail, beginning with the Dutchman Trail and finishing along the Bluff Spring Trail. One early morning during April, 3 of us, including Audrey's sister, readied for the hike. Clouds lined up perfectly on the horizon, reminding me of the Georgia O'Keeffe painting hanging in the Art Institute in Chicago, "The Sky Above Clouds," number 4. Overhead, we could see the intermittent clouds, and to the south the clouds became more abstract and appeared as long fingers with twisted fingernails. On this pleasantly chilled morning, Audrey wore a sweatshirt and knee-length tan shorts. She was growing her naturally red hair long under her shoulders. Her polarized sunglasses were in the 1980s style, large and octagonal. Her sister had a short bob cut and dressed in a similar style. We all wore hiking boots. I carried a day pack with canteens of water, both inside and strapped loose outside, snacks, and my Nikon FM camera. I preferred the independence of the FM. Its manual control, although old-fashioned, allowed me complete control of exposure and depth of field. It had rained within the past day in the Phoenix area, and in celebration the desert produced bouquets of wildflowers. Dust along the trail was nearly gone because of the rain. Excuse me. As we began the hike, we heard only the scrunch of small ancient gravel from ancient seas and volcanoes beneath our boots. We packed in our water since there was no other safe water along the trails. Water weighs 8 pounds per gallon, and loaded on backpacks it is the heaviest necessity. I've heard from hikers who drank at springs, but wildlife count on it for survival. Chances of getting violently ill from bacteria is the gamble, as it is for wildlife, so I opted to carry the load of water. The Dutchman Trail began as a wide trail, then narrows to single file as it entered the untamed desert. The trail started at the shallow bottom of a basin with views in all directions to the far horizon. The basin was nearly flat from a hiker's point of view, and if not watching the ground while hiking, my eye rose to look to the eastern horizon where far mountains reigned. To the north or left of the trail, the seemingly impenetrable, eroded volcanic mountains formed a long, solid wall. Along the trail, I enjoyed seeing large cloud banks from storm systems moving east or away from the area. Especially during early morning, the sun would rise over the eastern peaks and the clouds were dramatic and dark. During some hikes in late spring, I counted on a hot, dry hike and looked skyward into a baked white blue punctuated by the relentless sun. With the lure of solitude, I knew the hotter the day, the less likely other hikers would arrive to venture into the land. I always brought along a camera, so I would not miss documenting a natural moment. The lower Sonoran zone dominates the beginning of the hike. The indicator species, the stately saguaro, is generously represented. The wispy Palo Verde tree makes an appearance, and a sprinkling of prickly pear species are well placed. There were also hedgehog cactus, barrel cactus, and jojoba. Deeper into the Barkley Basin, creosote bush became the dominant plant species for as far as the eye could see. Although it is a wilderness, due to a grandfather clause, cattle could still be seen grazing upon the fragile environment. Along the trail are forests of teddy bear cholla, so thick with spines the cactus appear to glow yellow with huggable puffs. I enjoy seeing them because their forests are too alien for humans to enter. There is no apex predator that can fly through or run into the dense and pain-inducing puffs. These puffs cover the cactus that grow up to 8 feet. Sections of needle-covered stems drop from the plant and roll onto the trail. Proper footwear for hiking the desert means boots and not sneakers. Cholla needles are barbed to hang on to anything that brushes it. No matter how painful it gets, the stems cannot be pulled out by hand. The barbs are so embedded that a quick tug will either cause the stem to transfer to a hand for further pain or remain embedded. I have found that a comb does well for removal. A dense stand of cholla is a forest for small mammals to live in. I have noticed one of the more opportunistic of desert bird species, the cactus wren, has adapted to live in the crook of a cholla. These wrens build nests amid the fortress of needles as protection for their young. The architecture of the nest is enclosed, with a tunneled entrance at one end or both. They build their nests using grass of varying lengths and materials that are flexible, so that the well-woven nest is tightly constructed between the longer stems of the cholla. I have watched the female wren as she made the nest with her beak. The male brings material that she either uses or rejects. We have seen them build a nest in a graythorn. Later, the nesting pair rejected that nest and moved over to a walking stick cholla. A pair of curved-billed thrashers then arrived to take over the nest moments after the cactus wren tore off the top of the tube. For a year after that, finches and sparrows used the now abandoned withering nest material for their own. The trail eventually turned toward the mountains, and the once wide open views were replaced with tall cliffs. It is a milestone during that hike because from a distance there appeared to be no other way to breach the solid wall. Its brute strength looked impenetrable until we got closer to the point where you enter the mountain. There, during a previous hike along the same trail, we spotted a lone traveler. He was an historical barrage. A white-bearded prospector rode a horse with a pack burro following. The man wore a floppy hat and rough clothes. He was uphill from us and off the trail. I remember thinking I should photograph him, but then I could not. I did not want to disturb the moment. The old prospector is etched like a photograph in my mind. Possibly he was a survivor of the desert after a search for the lost Dutchman mine. In the Superstitions, one of the easiest landmarks to locate is Weaver's Needle. It is named for an early Arizona frontier guide named Pauline Weaver. Various sources claim Native Americans had a different name for it. I am skeptical of the popular notion. Supposedly, the translation from an unnamed native language meant stallion's penis. Now that I have perpetuated the unsubstantiated name, I would almost bet you will never forget it, as I have never forgot it. Historically, archaeologists have found that the ancient Hohokam and Salado cultures resided within the mountains. More recently in the historic record, the Apache may have moved through the mountainous fortress in preparation to raiding the crops of the Pima people. Along the mountainous wall is Miner's Needle, a real monolith that formed like Weaver's Needle. It is a frozen remnant of molten rock from the interior of an ancient volcano. After the volcano eroded away, only the solid needle remained. We entered the mountains of the Loop Trail, and the vistas became three-dimensional. There were dark, rough crags in our foreground, punctuated by living barrel cactus and large creosote or jojoba bushes. In the distance were mountains and the occasional glimpse of the basin behind us. Along the trail we saw evidence of yesterday's rain, with the formation of small pools and running rivulets. Below us was Peralta Creek. The rainwater had drained underground except in spots where water was forced up. Those marshy areas had thin stands of tall native grasses rising above the anchorage of the sand. Javelina herds had left traces that they had visited the marsh. Wildflowers lit up the ground, pleasing to the eye's palette. Desert paintbrush had flowers painted in stunning red. I leaned over closer and could see a cluster of sunlit petals that hovered as if in midair over long, thin stems and low-lying leaves that barely registered in the deep shade. Crowding the edge of the trail, several one-seed junipers maintained a low profile as the trail curved south. Along a section of Peralta Creek that ran above ground, there was an Arizona sycamore. The brown leaves this deep into the spring meant the rain was too little or too late. The water above ground shimmered with white starbursts in the sunlight amid the ripples of nearly black water in the shaded areas. Further on, tall, spindly trunks of a pair of young cottonwood trees were topped by a restrained canopy. Near the cottonwoods, the creek widened, slowed, and was patched green along the edge from shoreline algae. As the Dutchman Trail turned into the Bluff Spring, difficult switchbacks left us with little change in vistas. Below, the creek meandered. Once we reached the floor, below the crags, above us were the dactite cliffs. Along the shaded gray cliff faces, I thought I could see the bright red knots of wildflower displays, but instead it was mountain climbers, belayed on fluorescent colored ropes. Except for the bright colors, they would have been invisible. Our hike ended late Sunday afternoon with a milky sun visible in the southwest. Another spring hike I enjoyed in the Superstition Mountains was along Boulder Canyon Trail. I had learned about the trail from my fellow hiker-photographer friend Tim. I had hiked it before, but Tim accompanied me as guide to farther points. The trail was located on the opposite side of the mountainous wilderness from Peralta Trailhead. It was directly adjacent to the Apache Trail, a long winding gravel and dirt road. The trailhead was across the road from Canyon Lake Marina. The only parking for the trail was at the marina. That fact seemed wrong. How could I feel like I was experiencing the wilderness if I parked at the marina? But there was no choice, so I parked in the huge lot as far away from the marina as possible. Only 100 yards from the lot and across the road was the nearly invisible trailhead. Tim and I bounded forward as the trail rose quickly. I glanced behind me to the large man-made reservoir. There were early morning water skiers, spraying tall rooster tails behind ski boats, and fishermen, hunched in their small, silvery outboard motorboats. The marina was shimmering alongside the lake. I turned away and viewed a desert vista so large there is no way I could absorb the entire scene. My eyes could only accept parts of the countless desert canyons washing into the distance, like waves washing ashore, one after the other. This trail had an odd phenomenon attached with it. I've never seen it before or since and cannot find a mention of it online, except for one website that records the lost Dutchman mine story and maintains the many clues as to the location of the mine. The website claimed the phenomenon may be a clue to the mine's location. Near, but not directly along the trail, Tim and I saw saguaros with thin fractured pieces of shale sticking horizontally out of their ribs. More pieces of shale littered the ground around and beyond the cactus. We scanned for the source and found a small rise, covered with unfractured and newly fractured shale. Tim and I contemplated about the shale in the cactus. Immediately we determined some rude humans were involved. Then one of us noticed that the small fragments stuck in the cactus were only at a certain height, and not anywhere else except facing the small hill of fragmented shale. Our conclusion was that tremendous winds on the exposed plateau could drive the fragments into the sides of the saguaros. Although the saguaros looked to have been stabbed, they were not in much danger because of their ability to heal by forming a solid shell around the invader, whether it is a rock or a bird making an interior nest. In the superstitions, depending on the trail, there are a variety of landscapes. There are trails for sweeping vistas with views up or down. Others are streamside hikes, or there are flat and easy hikes and steep and difficult hikes. I learned to choose my own hiking experience. The Boulder Canyon trail meandered up and down along canyons. At first glance, one canyon looked to be distant. A stream ran below, massed in deep shadow at the bottom. Just one small sunlit sliver of watery thread ran into the distance. Then the trail became steep, going downhill without the benefit of switchbacks. We continued at a brisk pace, surrounded by cactus and rocks. Then we suddenly came upon the stream that we had seen from far above. We continued streamside until we came to the boulders that gave the trail its name. We scrambled up and over boulders the size of cars, trucks, and houses. Beyond were more boulders. We stopped at two massive boulders that formed a cave with a pool of precious water. The sand around the water hole that was covered with wildlife tracks. We spent time investigating the area and the biome that existed because of the unusual geologic formation. Tim told me that he had once made it to the top, but advised that we should not. Tim explained that the stream became steeper and we had a long way to go to the summit. We concluded we had gone far enough and began our return until we paused for lunch at a well-placed trailside natural arch. Below the arch was a small, sandy-bottomed, shady grotto. It was a fine place for lunch, and we sat and talked. I recalled my first hike along the trail. I did not go very far, only to get a lay of the land and photograph the landscape. On my return hike, about halfway back to the trailhead, I encountered a male javelina standing ahead of me on the trail. The trail was terraced on the edge of a steep slope. That lone bull seemed interested in me and snorted violently. I reasoned that it may want to attack. The only way for me to escape was either to go back along the trail or skip the trail altogether and head down off the trail along the steep slope. That is what I did. Behind me I heard the hoof falls of the javelina and the click-clack of small rocks as they scattered down the slope. I kept up a quick pace, causing further rock slides. I believe I must have outpaced the javelina, but the rock slides I caused kept me running downhill anyway. Finally, for a moment I looked back to see there was no pursuit, no javelina. At the end of the hike, I came to the car and decided it would be a good time to go to the marina. After our lunch, Tim and I decided we would need to move on because the upcoming part of the return trail included a steep uphill climb. Participating in a wilderness experience is as vital today as for all human existence. I do not want my experience of wildness in nature to be a document of an endangered world. Human memory is a time machine that can recall accurate and inaccurate truths, senses, and impressions. After a generation passes, their memories are gone, and only written reminiscences, photographs, videos, oral history, and books could define them and the places they experienced. I access former generations through various media, but my imagination is biased by my own experiences, thoughts, and beliefs. Then my imagination becomes a unique connection to the lost worlds of former generations. And so ends the chapter. Next will be a portfolio of photographs. Hope to see you then. So long.